I am Linda van Tilburg and I'm reporting for National Security News, and I have Tony Leon, a former leader of the Democratic Alliance and one of the negotiators for this process of finding a government of national unity. Tony Leon, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
How far are we? Are we closer to a government of national unity?
Well, we're certainly close. I think it's a matter of, if not hours, then a day or so until an announcement is made. And we'll have to see, broadly, there's an authentic choice on the one hand, and leaving aside all the background noise and all the leaking and the grandstanding, publicly and privately, is the ANC going to have a reasonable deal with a party like the DA and have a government that commands stability and a majority in parliament? Or alternatively, it can get to that stability and majority by coalescing with the EFF and the MK, or it can have no majority or a bare majority by excluding the three biggest parties or some combination of them and having what effectively amounts to a minority government which will have to limp along vote by vote and session by session in Parliament. I think those are the choices that confront, well, it is the ANC's choice. They are not a majority party, but they are the biggest minority party in that parliament of many parties.
There has been some reports of the fact that there might be a different view of Helen Zille, the chair of the DA, and the leader, John Steenhuisen. Is that true?
I think it's completely untrue. Look, Helen tends to be a lightning rod for a lot of people, and she's not shy of public controversies, but she's not on a solo mission here. She is the chairperson of the DA's federal executive, but there's no position she's taken publicly or privately, to the best of my knowledge, which contradicts the overall DA position in which John Steenhuisen, as the leader, has the significant say. But I'm not aware of any divisions at the top table of the DA, which I've only recently rejoined after many years of absence from it.
So what are we looking at in terms of cabinet positions? Do you have any indications of what could happen, or deputy ministers?
No, I have an indication of what might eventuate, but, without going to the mafia code of omerta or silence, I don't think these things are best achieved by publicly broadcasting them, although there has been quite a bit in the media and the back and forth. But ultimately, the president, as his spokesperson has said, does have the prerogative to appoint ministers, but the ANC, as the biggest party in Parliament, entered into an agreement on the 14th of June with the DA and other parties, which say, on the one hand, the president's got that prerogative, but the inclusion of other parties as ministerial appointees will be done on a basis that's broadly proportional to their electoral support, and also in consultation with the party leader. So that's the structure. How this, of course, works out, we'll have to see. I am reminded, Linda, of that famous aphorism. It's attributed to Bismarck, but it actually wasn't by him, but it sounds though it could be Bismarckian. If you enjoy eating sausages, don't watch them being made. So we're kind of in that process right now.
Are you happy we can get a stable government from this? Because you mentioned the word stable, from the deals that are on the table at the moment.
I can only speak on the side of the table I've been on, which is the DA side. If an agreement is finalized, and it has been in discussion between the DA and the ANC, you will have a stable government. You'll have a government that commands at least 62% of the votes, and with other smaller parties, the ANCs bring in probably about 68%. So that gives you stability. Obviously, it's one thing to have stable government. You've also got to have government that delivers on its core promises, and there's a broad agreement under the 14th of June agreement that was signed between the DA, the ANC, and subsequently by other parties, which sets out to defend the constitution, grow the economy, curb crime, make an impact on unemployment and on poverty. Those are very good goals. But as you know, the devil is always in the detail.
Are you happy that you'll get the portfolios, that you can make that difference, that investors are looking for, that the international community is looking for?
Well, I think it's a qualitative and a quantitative thing, two things. So I think if there's an agreement, the DA's got to receive under the terms of the 14th of June agreement, a broadly proportional share. It doesn't have to be exact numbers, but it's got to reflect the fact that the DA is a 22% party and not a 2% party. And the fact the ANC is a 40% party and not a 70% party. That's not a matter of argument. That's what the electorate bestowed on each of the parties. On the qualitative side, obviously, you want to see a government where if the DA is in it, and that's a presupposition at this stage, it can deliver to the people who elected it and to the aspirations and policies which it stands for. So I think it's both a quantitative and a qualitative aspect, or two aspects, really. And we'll have to see what finally emerges from this process.
And one of the issues that the international community or investors is asking is really that corruption is addressed. Could the DA do that? Because they used to be the watchdog over corruption. Could they do it if they are inside the government?
Well, that old saying, the poacher becomes the gamekeeper. I mean, the DA is going to, if it goes into the government, is going to trade what it knows and does best. That's being in the opposition and providing robust parliamentary accountability, which certainly my 13 years as parliamentary and party leader, I tried to lead the charge on. And actually going to government where you've got to actually deliver on things, but you can't do it on an anything goes basis. And the DA has very clear views on corruption and on anti-corruption. I have to say all the parties, and this is a theoretical construction right now, Linda, because, we have to see what happens when the rubber hits the road, but have committed themselves to a corruption-free public service. There's been not much evidence in that or of that in South Africa over the last 30 years, but let's hope that a new government turns a new page. We'll have to see.
You mentioned the public service. Wouldn't a problem be that you might be in government, but there's a reluctant public service that you're dragging along in the process that might be still very much pro-ANC?
Yes, and I look, that has been one of the issues on our engagement with the ANC. Is it's one thing, you don't just want to have, as they say in Afrikaans, a winkelkop in die venster, sort of mannequin in the shop window. You actually want to have levers of power, not for power's sake, but because you want to exercise a difference in the governance that you're part of, but something's got to be attached to those levers. And it can't be recalcitrant public servants who spend all their days and nights frustrating the purposes of their political overlords. So I think that will have to be worked out. Look, there's been very little time for all this. It's worth reflecting, Linda, that coalition governments, and this is a coalition in all but name. You can give it any title you want, but it's basically coalitions happen where one party doesn't have 50% and has to bring in other parties to create a majority government, and that's what's happened here. So if you look at the case of Belgium, which has only ever had coalition governments and has a very fractured polity like South Africa, it took over a year to constitute a government. In the Netherlands and Germany, these processes take months, and there they get everything agreed up front, and then they take their seats around the cabinet table here because of the timeframes of our constitution, which is completely unused to coalition governments. It only really reflects the fact that the assumption of the constitution writers, of whom I was one in 1996, that one party would win a majority and therefore elect the president and go about and form a cabinet, as the president is entitled to do under the Constitution. But as we saw with the election of President Ramaphosa last week, or on the 14th of June, he couldn't have been elected just with ANC votes, because there aren't enough ANC votes in Parliament or MPs to elect the president. There had to be other parties, and the DA certainly lent President Ramaphosa its 87 votes to get him over that line. But the next phase of the details of how it's going to govern, what the relationship between government, public servants, and all that is beyond the letter of the law, which obviously must be upheld, is going to have to be negotiated in the next few weeks and months if this government gets going.
You've been at the previous election negotiations in the 90s. How does this differ, the different characters? You've got very strong characters in the terms of Helen Zille in this that you know really well. How does it differ?
Well, look, I have to say in the previous negotiations I was involved in, which led to the Constitution between 1991 and 1996, was hardly absent of strong characters. There was Nelson Mandela, there was F.W. de Klerk, Rolf Meyer, Joe Slover. There were some pretty titanic figures of those times. So I don't think that that we've ever seen their like since. I'll leave myself out of it since I've been in all processes. So I don't think that character or personalities made that significant a difference. I think what's really made a difference, if I think back to those times to these times, is there was no social media then. So you didn't have everything suddenly exploding into the public and everyone with a cell phone having a viewpoint or being an influencer, as they call it, and in a way distorting outcomes by trying to peddle a particular partisan or even often a poisonous point of view. We've got some media houses here headed by a gentleman called Iqbal Survey, which really are just pots of poison, spewing out the most extraordinary fake news. Now, that was not a feature of the 91 to 1996 period. So that is a big difference. There was not this constant 24/7 news cycle influenced by, the whole world and then some. So I think that makes negotiations more difficult now. And also, of course, we've now got 30 years of experience, and it's been, in the main, a very disappointing experience. I think in 1993, when in November, we agreed the interim constitution, there was a lot of hope about how South Africa would turn out and turn the page and commence a new chapter. And even in 96, when we finalized the constitution and parliament, there was an enormous following wind of expectation because everything looked fair set for South Africa to play a leading role in the world. I think the experience since then has proven that, to quote famous American governor, you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. And it's been fairly prosaic, quite a lot of the missteps and misadventures since. So I think we were informed by that, but also the world is not waiting for South Africa to get its act together, and as you know, and we were at a very high place, global expectations in the 90s, and we're a much more modest place now, and we've got to get our mojo back. And I think the whole investor community is looking to seeing what signals are going to come from this. If they're good signals, I think there'll be a re-engagement by the markets and by investors in the world. If they're bad signals, the situation could deteriorate very rapidly.
In terms of foreign policy, the ANC has been controversial. How do you reconcile the differences of the ANC and the DA in foreign policy?
There are big differences on many policy fronts, foreign policy one of them, and those differences and dissenting viewpoints did not disappear if the DA goes into government of national unity. It's how you get a common approach, bearing in mind that the ANC is a 40% party and the DA is a 22% party. So the ANC's voice is significantly bigger than the DA's, but doesn't crowd out every other voice in the room under these new arrangements. We'll have to see. And I don't expect or anticipate that either party, or there are several other parties in this that have another viewpoint. You've got, for example, the extremely pro-Israeli Patriotic Alliance, which has entered this government of national unity. Then you've got the very pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli Al-Jama'ah, who are also in the government of national unity. Now, I don't know what positions they're going to occupy at the top table, but that's arguably a greater contradiction than anything that the DA offers, because the DA's got a rather even-handed approach on the Middle East, and because the DA's got very strong Jewish support and very strong Muslim support, and it also believes in public international law, so its policy reflects that. But it's not a factional party, but you've got quite a few factional parties with very strong foreign policy views who are going to be in this government. So that's not for me to determine, but for the president to determine how he weighs up all those contradictory voices. I do have to say that, and the election campaign did reflect this very strongly, and it's not a South African phenomenon, but South African confirmed. Foreign policy does not win domestic votes. And you can look at all the voting results in Cape Town. I mean, it was an attempt by the ANC to weaponize the Gaza war by launching a campaign against the DA on this basis, wrong-headed as it might have been. And the ANC lost 9% of its existing support in the Western Cape. This Patriotic Alliance, which had a vehemently pro-Israel standpoint, gained 9% in the Western Cape. Now, I'm not saying there's a direct correlation, But there's an interesting dynamic there. And people are not concerned, quite frankly, here about events in the faraway Middle East. They might be very impactful for various communities, the Muslim community, the Jewish community, and maybe people who worry about the world. But, a lot of folk in South Africa without jobs, without much hope, living in poverty amidst a lot of crime, that's not top of their agenda, as the election results reflected. And if the government, whatever form this government takes, is going to squander its political capital trying to influence events far away, and which is only ever going to be a marginal player, then I think it's going to lose a lot of opportunities at home.
Tony Leon, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Linda.